Hi everyone, welcome to Whispered Revenge, where silence hides secrets and whispers reveal them.
My name is Mia. I'm 22 years old, and the worst pain I felt that night wasn't the fresh stitches pulling across my abdomen. It was hearing the front door click shut behind me, thinking I had finally made it home to rest, only to be hit by a voice that sounded like punishment instead of family. I had just been discharged after surgery. I was pale, exhausted, and still moving carefully because every step felt like a blade twisting under my ribs. My discharge bracelet was still on my wrist, and the smell of antiseptic had barely faded from my skin. I barely had one hand on the wall before my brother's voice slammed into me from the living room. "Nice of you to finally come home. Quit faking it and get dinner on the table this second." He didn't ask how the operation went. He didn't ask if I could stand. He didn't even look surprised that I could barely breathe without wincing. He just looked at me like I was late for a shift he thought I still belonged to. For 1 second, I almost did what I had always done, lower my head, swallow the hurt, and obey. But then I remembered I wasn't alone. A man had walked in just behind me, carrying the small overnight bag I'd been too weak to hold. He had heard every cold, cruel word. I didn't turn around yet. I didn't need to. I could feel the silence behind me change, heavy and dangerous, like something powerful had just stepped into the room and was taking careful note of everything. My brother still hadn't realized the biggest mistake of his life wasn't ordering me to cook after surgery. It was doing it in front of the one man who could destroy everything he cared about. That night began with pain, humiliation, and the same cruelty I had endured for years. But before it ended, the balance of power inside that house would change in a way none of us could ever take back. My brother's name is Jake. He's 6 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, he treated being born first like it gave him ownership over the whole house, over my time, over my body, over my silence. Some families have an older brother who teaches you how to ride a bike or scares off boys who bother you at school. I had Jake. Jake taught me how to apologize for things I didn't do, how to move quietly enough not to attract his temper, and how to clean up messes I never made, because that was easier than listening to him rage for an hour. He had a way of making commands sound like facts, as if my role in life had already been assigned, and everyone else had simply forgotten to tell me. As I stood in that doorway with fresh stitches under my shirt, pain medicine making the edges of the room blur, the past didn't come back to me like a normal memory. It hid in flashes, sharp and ugly. Each pulse of pain dragging another old image up from the bottom of me. I saw myself at 12, kneeling on the kitchen floor while Jake dropped dirty plates into the sink and told me I was useless if dinner wasn't hot by 6. Another stab across my abdomen, and suddenly I was 16 again, clutching a report card with grades good enough for scholarships, only for Jake to laugh and say girls like me didn't leave places like this, that I would always be the helper. Never the one anyone chose. Another pulse of pain, and I remembered being 19, working double shifts, hiding money in an old coffee tin because I was trying to save for classes. Then one day, the money was gone, and Jake shrugged and said I must have misplaced it. He never admitted he took it, but I knew. I always knew. The cruel part wasn't just what he did. It was how normal he made it feel. He had a talent for turning abuse into routine until I almost doubted my own mind. Even after years of it, some part of me kept hoping he would change. I kept thinking one day he would look at me and finally see a sister instead of a servant. But surgery strips away illusions. Pain does that too. When your body has been cut open and stitched back together, you stop romanticizing the people who keep trying to wound you. "Did you hear me?" He snapped from the couch. "I'm hungry." The old version of me would have flinched first and thought later. That night, I did neither. I stood still, one hand pressed lightly over my bandage, and let the silence stretch just long enough for him to get irritated. Then I lifted my head and looked at him the way I should have years ago, not like a storm to survive, but like a man who had gotten away with too much for too long. He still didn't notice the man behind me. He still thought this was going to be another ordinary night, one where I limped to the stove and he got what he wanted. That was the thing about people like Jake. They confuse repetition with permanence. They think because you endured them yesterday, you'll endure them forever. They mistake your exhaustion for loyalty and your silence for consent. And when the silence finally breaks, they act betrayed by the sound of your voice. The man behind me set my bag down gently by the door before stepping fully into the light, and for the first time since I had walked in, Jake's face changed. Not enough to show fear yet, but enough to show confusion. He straightened on the couch, lowered the TV remote, and narrowed his eyes. "Who the hell is that?" he asked, not because he cared, but because he hated anything he didn't control. I took one careful breath before answering. "His name is Adrian Cole," I said. "He helped bring me home from the hospital." That much was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Adrian hadn't been some random kind stranger. Earlier that afternoon, after my discharge was delayed because the nurse was concerned I had no safe recovery support at home, Adrian had happened to be in the surgical unit visiting a family foundation program his company funded. He wasn't a doctor, and he wasn't hospital staff. He was the executive chairman of Cole Hospitality Group, the company that owned 12 restaurants, 2 catering divisions, and the downtown hotel where Jake had worked his way up to assistant operations manager. I hadn't known that at first. All I had known was that he saw me struggling to lift my overnight bag, asked where my ride was, and watched my face fall when I admitted I was going home alone because the only family I had nearby was busy. He had a calm way of looking at people that made lying feel pointless. By the time we reached the parking lot, he had already guessed more than I said. By the time we reached the apartment building, he had quietly made 2 phone calls from the passenger seat and asked whether I felt safe going inside. I remember giving the kind of answer women give when they've been trained to minimize damage. "It'll be fine." Adrian had glanced at me, not unkindly, and said, "People usually say that right before they describe something that isn't fine at all." In the elevator, he didn't push for details. He simply stood close enough to help if I lost my balance, and far enough away not to make me feel cornered. That restraint mattered more than he probably knew. Now he stood 3 foot inside the apartment, coat still on, expression unreadable. Jake got to his feet slowly, and that's when his phone buzzed. He looked down, annoyed, and his face tightened. I caught the company logo on the notification banner before he tilted the screen away. Cole Hospitality Internal Alert. The timing was so precise, it felt like a match striking near gasoline. "You work for him?" I asked before I could stop myself. Jake shot me a sharp look, but Adrian answered instead. "He works at one of my properties," he said evenly. "Though, after what I just heard, I imagine that arrangement is about to become complicated." Jake laughed, but it came out thin. "This is my family. You don't get to walk into my house and judge a private conversation." Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "A private conversation?" he repeated. "You ordered a woman who just returned from surgery to cook for you while she was visibly in pain. That's what you call private?" Jake's jaw flexed. He hated being corrected in front of anyone, but especially a man whose opinion might cost him something real. I could smell the sweat beginning under his cologne now. I could hear the change in his breathing. The room didn't feel tense in a vague, dramatic way. It felt precise, surgical, like a lie being cut open. Adrian turned slightly toward me. "Mia, are you on the lease here?" That question hit me harder than Jake's shouting ever could because it came from a place Jake had spent years trying to bury. "Yes," I said carefully. "My aunt helped me sign it when I turned 21. My credit was better than his." Jake snapped his head toward me. "Why are you saying that like it matters?" But Adrian's eyes never left mine. "Because it matters a great deal," he said. "And because men who depend on women they disrespect usually count on them being too ashamed to say who actually keeps the roof in place." For the first time that night, I saw something raw flash across Jake's face. Not rage, not yet. Fear. Before Jake could push back, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a random interruption. An hour earlier, when I was still half awake in recovery, I had sent one text with shaking fingers to the only person who had ever believed me without making me prove every bruise no one could see. "Come tonight if you can. I may need help." Her name was Sarah, and if loyalty had a human shape, it would have looked a lot like her standing in that hallway with a paper bag of soup in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. The second she saw my face, her expression changed from worried to furious. Not loud furious. Focused furious. She stepped inside, looked from me to Jake to Adrian, and understood in under 3 seconds that she had arrived in the middle of something ugly. "You should be in bed," she said softly to me first. That was Sarah. Even in war, she started with care. "She should be in the kitchen," Jake muttered, trying to recover control through mockery. Sarah turned to him with the kind of stillness that makes weak men reckless. "You really said that out loud while she still has hospital tape on her arm?" she asked. Jake rolled his shoulders, trying to look unimpressed. "And you are?" "Someone who knows more than you think," she said. Then she lifted the envelope slightly. "A lot more." I stared at it. Sarah had been helping me sort through old records for weeks because there had been missing money. Money I had saved for surgery, money that disappeared in pieces over the last year whenever Jake claimed the power bill was overdue or the rent needed covering or some emergency at work meant he would pay me back next Friday. Then the Friday after that. Then never. I had stopped confronting him because he lied with such confidence that I ended up feeling guilty for asking. But Sarah never forgot details. She had the patience of someone who knew truth did not need speed, only evidence. She noticed dates, copied receipts, saved screenshots, and remembered every excuse exactly as he said it. "Mia texted me from the hospital," Sarah said, placing the soup on the counter. She sounded scared. "So I brought food and paperwork." Jake scoffed, but I noticed his right hand twitch. "Paperwork for what?" Sarah gave a small shrug. "Bank transfer screenshots, a copy of the digital rent ledger, 2 withdrawals from Mia's recovery fund routed through your account, 1 payment to an online sports book, 1 past due notice from your credit card. And," she added, tapping the envelope once, "a resignation warning from your employer that you conveniently forgot to mention." Jake lunged forward half a step. "You went through my things?" "No," Sarah said. "I went through Mia's finances after she asked me why she was suddenly short on the amount she needed for medication and post-op therapy." Funny where the trail led. Adrian said nothing, but I saw him take that in. Every word, every implication. Jake looked at me then, not angry in the usual way, but exposed, which for him was much worse. "You brought people here to humiliate me?" he demanded. "No," I said, and my voice surprised even me, because it didn't shake. "You did that yourself. They just happened to witness it." Sarah moved closer, not blocking me, but anchoring me. "There's one more thing," she said. "Tell him, Mia, or I will." My throat tightened because I knew exactly what she meant. 6 months ago, when the surgery had first been recommended, I started a separate savings account under a nickname Jake didn't know. Or so I thought. The week before my pre-op appointment, nearly $3,000 vanished. Not all at once. In careful little cuts. Enough to make me question my own tracking. Enough to delay my procedure by 2 months while I picked up extra shifts and lived on noodles and painkillers. Sarah had found the pattern. Jake had been siphoning money in amounts small enough to hide, then covering it with fake utility panic and emotional pressure. "He stole from me," I said finally, and the room seemed to go very still. Not once, repeatedly. "He took the money I was saving for surgery." Sarah looked directly at Jake. "I know what you did when she was 18, too," she said. And for the first time that night, color drained from his face. Years ago, Jake had talked me into co-signing a small personal loan because he said he needed it for a work certification and promised he would handle every payment. He missed the first 3, tanked my credit, then told everyone in the family I was irresponsible with money. I had spent years repairing damage he created. I had never told many people because shame is quiet by design. Sarah knew. Now, Adrian knew too. The apartment felt smaller, but I didn't. For the first time in that living room, every secret Jake had used to keep me weak was starting to belong to the light instead. Even the air felt different, as if the truth itself had changed the shape of the room. Jake did what men like him always do when the truth gets too close. He tried to turn it into a performance. He laughed too loudly, spread his arms, and looked at Adrian like this was all some ridiculous misunderstanding staged by emotional women. "You can't possibly be taking this seriously," he said. "She's dramatic when she doesn't get attention. Sarah feeds it. That's all this is." I watched him carefully then. the way I might have watched a machine breaking down while still insisting it worked. His voice was louder, but his body had already betrayed him. His fingers kept flexing. His shoulders lost their easy swagger. He wasn't arguing from certainty anymore. He was arguing from panic. "Do I look dramatic to you?" I asked. He ignored me and spoke to Adrian instead, as if I were still too small to address directly. "You run hotels, restaurants, big company, right? Then, people blow family arguments out of proportion. She's always been sensitive, and she likes making me the villain because I don't baby her." Adrian tilted his head slightly, studying him. "In my experience," he said, "men who use the word sensitive when confronted with their cruelty are usually describing the witness, not the problem."
Sarah almost smiled at that.
Jake turned on her next because he sensed Adrian was no longer his easiest target. "And you," he snapped, "you've always wanted to turn her against me." Sarah folded her arms.
"No."
"I wanted her to stop apologizing for surviving you." That sentence landed like a slap. I saw it hit him. For years, Jake had controlled the narrative by acting like every reaction I had was evidence of instability. If I cried, I was manipulative. If I stayed silent, I was passive-aggressive. If I confronted him, I was disrespectful. There was no version of me he would allow that didn't make him the center. But that night, the pattern was finally visible. Not just to me, but to witnesses he couldn't bully into doubt. "Tell him about the landlord emails," Sarah said quietly. I swallowed and nodded. 3 months ago, I said, looking at Adrian because somehow it was easier to tell the truth while facing calm instead of chaos. I found out Jake had been telling the property office I was the reason rent was late. He said I spent money irresponsibly, that I was unstable after pain episodes, that I needed managing. Adrian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Were those statements true?
"No."
I covered the rent most months. My name is primary on the lease. He used my bank transfers to keep the account current, then told people he was rescuing me. Sarah reached into the envelope and handed Adrian copies of transfer receipts I recognized immediately. The dates, the amounts, my account numbers. The proof felt surreal in someone else's hand. Jake stepped forward. "You have no right." Adrian lifted a palm, and Jake stopped. Not because he respected him, because instinct told him he should. "I have every right to review evidence when an employee appears to have engaged in theft, harassment, and possibly financial fraud against a vulnerable tenant recovering from surgery," Adrian said. Jake gave a bitter laugh. "Vulnerable? She's milking this surgery like it makes her helpless." I don't know if he realized how monstrous that sounded spoken aloud. Maybe he did, and simply couldn't stop. Maybe cruelty had become such a reflex that he no longer heard himself. "Say that again," Adrian said, his voice suddenly low. Jake hesitated. "I said she's milking it." Adrian took one slow step toward him. "Interesting," he said. "Because the hospital discharge notes I reviewed before offering her a ride home specifically warned against lifting, standing for prolonged periods, and unnecessary strain due to internal sutures. If she had gone to that stove for you tonight and collapsed, would you have called an ambulance? Or would you have told them she was being dramatic then, too?" Jake's mouth opened, then closed. I had never seen anyone pin him down without shouting. It was almost disorienting. Sarah used the silence well. "There's more," she said. She pulled out one final sheet. This came to the wrong email because Jake used me as address as backup contact on a company incident form. Apparently, he signed off on a vendor invoice last month that's under internal review. Jake whipped around. "Give me that." Sarah didn't flinch. Adrian held out his hand, and she passed the page to him instead. He scanned it once. The room shifted. This was no longer just family ugliness. This was collateral rot. "You forged an approval code?" Adrian asked. Jake's voice cracked with anger. "It was a timing issue. Everyone does it." Adrian looked up.
"No."
"Everyone does not." The buzz from Jake's phone came again, and this time even he seemed afraid to look. When he finally did, all the blood left his face. He had been suspended pending investigation, effective immediately. Access revoked. Property credentials disabled. He didn't have to read it aloud.
We could all see enough.
The room felt charged, but inside me something had gone strangely quiet. For years, I thought justice would feel explosive, like screaming, like shattered glass. Instead, it felt like watching the floor level under my feet after spending too long on a moving boat. Reality. Solid and overdue. Jake looked at me with something close to hatred now, but beneath it was a new and unfamiliar thing. Calculation. He was losing money, status, cover. And men who live off control rarely surrender without one final act of ugliness. The only question left was how ugly he was willing to get once he understood there was no clean exit left for him. The moment I saw that look in his eyes, I knew the night wasn't done. Exposure had stripped away the polished version of Jake he used for outsiders, and what remained was the core I had known since childhood. The part that couldn't stand power leaving his hands. "You think this is funny?"
He said.
But he wasn't really asking me. He was talking to the room, to the witnesses, to the version of himself still trying to survive the collapse. "You're all standing here ruining my life over nothing." "Nothing," I repeated. "You stole my money. You lied to the landlord. You wrecked my credit. You tried to make me cook the night I came home from surgery. I made sacrifices too," he shouted, taking a step toward me. "You think living here has been easy for me? You think I wanted to carry you forever?" He had rewritten history so completely that even now, caught in evidence, he was reaching for the old script where he was the burdened one, the martyr, the misunderstood provider. It would have been laughable if it hadn't cost me so much. "Carry me?" I said. "You lived off my paycheck. You used my name. You stole from my recovery fund." "Watch your mouth," he snapped, and another step brought him too close. My body reacted before my mind did. I flinched. I hated that I flinched, but trauma is faster than pride. Jake saw it and mistook it for victory. His hand came up. Not fully.
Not yet a strike.
But with that same old threat I had known since I was little. The movement that said he didn't need to hit me to remind me he could. Adrian stepped between us, so fast it didn't look theatrical. It looked practiced. Controlled. Absolute. "Don't,"
he said.
Just that one word. Jake stopped. Not because conscience reached him, because the line had finally moved outside his power. Sarah was already at my side, one arm around my shoulders without making a scene of it. "You saw that," she said to Adrian. "I did," Adrian replied. Then he turned slightly toward me. "Mia, has he threatened you physically before?" The old instinct rose again. Minimize, soften, avoid making it worse. But that instinct had nearly cost me my body, my savings, my sanity. I forced myself to answer plainly. "Yes," I said. Not always by hitting. Sometimes by blocking doors, getting close, breaking things near me, throwing plates, slamming walls, making sure I understood. Jake shouted my name, but Adrian cut across it. "Enough." He took out his phone, typed something, and made one call on speaker. "Building security," he said when the line connected. "This is Adrian Cole in Unit 4B. I need assistance documenting the removal of an unauthorized occupant from a tenant residence where verbal abuse and intimidation have just occurred."
"Yes. Now."
Jake stared at him. "Unauthorized occupant." Adrian looked at me. "Is he on the lease?" "No," I said. "Not officially. I never completed the addition forms." Jake laughed in disbelief. "You can't throw me out tonight." I reached into the drawer by the entry table with fingers that still trembled from pain and adrenaline. From inside, I pulled a thin folder, lease copies, utility records, and the one thing I had hidden from myself almost as much as from him.
"Certainty."
"Yes," I said. "I can." Saying it felt like opening a locked window in a room that had been stale for years. Jake looked at the folder, then at me, and realized I had known more than he wanted to believe. "You planned this," he said.
"No,"
I answered. "You just made it impossible for me to keep pretending." Sarah handed me another sheet from the envelope. The transfer summary, with the missing surgery funds highlighted in yellow. "And I want repayment," I said. "Every dollar. Including the loan damage and the medication costs I had to delay because of you." His face twisted. "You think anyone's going to take your side?" Adrian answered before I could. Her bank records already do. Your employer's suspension notice does. The lease does. And if you'd like to continue this conversation in front of police, I'm sure they'll find the attempted intimidation useful context. For the first time in my life, I watched Jake run out of angles. No charm, no shouting, no reversal, no private room where he could grind me down until I doubted what happened. He tried one last thing, the cruelest weapon of all.
Blood.
I'm your brother,
He said.
quieter now, as if tenderness could be borrowed at the end. You'd really do this to family? I looked at him and felt something crack. Not into grief, but into clarity. No, I said. Family is what you say when you want forgiveness without accountability. You stopped acting like my brother a long time ago. Then I realized something even sharper. All those years he had counted on that word family as if it were a lockpick, something he could use to open every boundary I tried to build. That was the moment he knew the old version of me was gone. Security arrived within minutes. 2 building staff members and the overnight manager, all suddenly very polite when Adrian identified himself, and very attentive when I produced the lease showing my name, my payments, my authority. Jake kept trying to interrupt, first with indignation, then with outrage, then with wounded disbelief. But each new tone only made him sound smaller. Sarah stood beside me with the envelope tucked under her arm like a closing argument waiting for the judge to sit down. Adrian remained calm, which somehow made everything more final. There was no dramatic brawl, no shattered lamp, no cinematic scream.
The destruction was cleaner than that.
Piece by piece, the systems Jake had leaned on started refusing to hold him. The overnight manager confirmed there had been prior complaints from neighbors about shouting and noise disturbances from the male occupant. Adrian, after a brief message exchange, informed Jake that company legal would be reviewing the vendor authorization issue first thing in the morning, and that his suspension was now paired with an internal fraud inquiry. Sarah quietly reminded him that the transfers from my surgery account had already been copied to a secure drive and time-stamped. Then came the part one didn't know I needed until it happened. I told security he was not permitted to remain in the apartment, and they asked him to gather essentials only. He looked at me as if I had become a stranger. In a way, I had. The girl who would have folded his shirts while he insulted her. The girl who would have reheated soup for him while cramping from pain. The girl who would have apologized just to keep the night from getting worse. That girl was done. Jake shoved clothes into a duffel bag with furious, jerky movements, muttering under his breath the entire time. At one point, he turned back toward me and said, "This isn't over." It should have scared me. Instead, it sounded tired. The threat had lost its fuel, because I no longer received it the same way. Sarah stepped half a pace forward, but I lifted a hand. I didn't need protecting from his words anymore. Actually, I said, "For you it is." He froze. Not because the sentence was loud, but because it was true. I took the folder from the entry table and removed one final document. The property renewal notice my aunt had helped me secure months earlier. The one Jake never knew I had signed. My tenancy had already been extended in my name only. "You told everyone this apartment depended on you," I said. "It never did."
You depended on me.
"That ends tonight." He stared at the page, then at Adrian, then at the security staff who were no longer treating him like someone with standing. You could almost see the last pieces connecting in his mind. No job access, no lease claim, no money pipeline, no private audience. No sister left to absorb the damage quietly. "Where am I supposed to go?" he demanded. And for a brief second, I thought of all the nights I had lain awake wondering exactly that myself after he emptied my account or threatened to leave me with overdue rent or made the apartment feel like enemy territory. Justice is not cruelty, but it is not rescue, either. That, I said, is the first problem you've had to solve without stealing the answer from me. Security escorted him into the hallway with a duffel bag hanging off one shoulder and his phone still in his hand, glowing with notifications that no longer meant influence. Right before the elevator doors opened, he turned back one last time, maybe expecting me to break, maybe expecting some final plea, some old reflex of mercy he could twist into access. Instead, I met his eyes and closed the apartment door. The click of the lock was one small sound, but to me it felt enormous. Final, clean, mine. I stood there for a few seconds with my palms still resting on the wood, breathing through the soreness in my abdomen and the strange weightlessness in my chest. Sarah exhaled first. "You okay?" she asked. I laughed once, softly, because okay wasn't the right word. I was sore. I was tired. I was furious for all the years I lost. But underneath all of it, something bright and steady had started to rise. I said slowly, "this is the first time I've been safe in my own home." Sarah's eyes softened immediately. Adrian, still near the entryway, gave me the kind of respectful distance people give when they understand they've witnessed something deeply personal. "Tomorrow," he said, "I can have someone connect you with legal support for the financial theft and help you document everything properly. Only if you want that." I looked at him, then at the papers in Sarah's hand, then around the apartment that suddenly seemed bigger, without Jake's presence contaminating every corner. The silence no longer felt threatening. It felt earned. "I do," I said, and I meant it. Not because I wanted revenge for the thrill of it, but because consequences are what truth looks like when it finally stops apologizing. Sarah opened the soup container and shoved a spoon into my hand like we had merely survived bad weather instead of a lifetime pattern breaking in half. I sat down carefully at the kitchen table, the same table where Jake had expected me to serve him. And for the first time, I ate while someone else made sure I rested. No orders, no insults, no fear humming underneath every movement. Just quiet. Just proof. Just the beginning of a life that no longer required my suffering to keep someone else comfortable. Later that night, after Sarah settled blankets on the couch and Adrian left me his card in case I needed anything documented, I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I expected to see someone shaken, someone fragile, someone barely holding it together. Instead, I saw a woman with tired eyes, hospital tape still clinging faintly to her skin, and a face that looked more honest than it had in years. Recovery, I realized, wasn't only about stitches closing. Sometimes it was about finally cutting out what kept reopening the wound. Jake lost his place in my home that night. By morning, he had lost his job, too. By the end of the week, he would be contacted about repayment and fraud review. But the thing that mattered most wasn't what he lost. It was what I got back. My name.
My space.
My voice. My future. The female lead handled her situation with courage, self-respect, and calm strength, showing that standing up for yourself can be more powerful than silence. Her choice reminds us that setting boundaries is sometimes the first step toward healing and justice. If you were in her position, how would you have handled the situation?